Well, it's been a little while since we've had an update on the Mustang Cobra, but do not worry, you guys have not missed a thing. It's been sitting right here, right behind me. Have not touched it. Been busy with the Camaro, the Corvette, the AMG, a whole bunch of other stuff that you've seen on the channel and some stuff that you haven't. But rest assured, I didn't do anything without you guys, so you haven't missed anything other than been gathering some parts so that we can get to work on this thing. So quick recap, this is my 2004 Mustang Cobra Screaming Yellow Coupe, 21,000 miles. And she is mint, but we're missing some stuff. She's missing a few components like the supercharger and a couple of other accessories, but I've spent the last few weeks sourcing, I think, everything that we need to get this car running. So let's dive right in, get this stuff unboxed, and I'll show you what we got. Well, this is it. I think this is most of what we're gonna need, if not everything that we're gonna need to get my Cobra running and driving again. So some of these parts you probably saw in the previous video, you know, the supercharger, the throttle body and inlet, fuel rails, and some other stuff. But a lot of the stuff over here is new. If you remember from the first video, a couple of the main components we were missing are now right here. This is the lower intake manifold. So that is what drops in to the center of the motor there in the valley. And then what bolts to the bottom of the supercharger and also occupies this space in the intake manifold here is the heat exchanger, which is what this is. This is actually a Garrett core that Garrett made for Ford. I'm sorry, if I said heat exchanger, I meant intercooler. Heat exchanger is up in the bumper. This is the intercooler. But this guy goes right there on the bottom of the supercharger, and this whole thing flips over right into here. So we have all of the major OEM Ford parts that we need to get this thing back together. And I've also sourced, I think, everything else that we're gonna need as far as little parts. Projects like this, I did my best to make sure that I had everything that we need here, but there's a very high probability that we get in there and be like, oh crap, we're missing an O-ring or some elbow or something. But I really tried to go through this whole supercharger setup in my mind and make sure that we have everything, but we'll see. Anyways, these are what's called the flow tubes. So actually, these are the flow tubes. This is the housing that the flow tubes go into. Basically, these guys pop in here and flow out of here into this, and then this kind of completes the loop for the heat exchanger and the intercooler reservoir. So these four things right here are the OEM Ford parts that are no longer made, so you have to get them used. Got them from a buddy down in Florida that deals with Cobras a lot, so he was able to get these up to me, and that's a big help. Here's some of the factory bolts that the previous owner included. We'll get to those in a second. Probably not going to use these. OEM Ford gaskets. This one is for the supercharger to lower intake. These two are for the lower intake to cylinder heads. And what do we got here? This looks like the throttle body, probably. This is a mass airflow adapter or flange that I'm going to weld to a piece of aluminum to complete our intake. We'll cover that a little bit later. Let's see, here's a new mass airflow sensor. I didn't find that in the previous owner's pile of parts, so I just got an original Ford one. Didn't want to deal with any aftermarket mass airflow sensor problems. These I'm not going to open up right now. These are new silicone O-rings for the flow tubes. These are some fuel rail block offs. If you guys remember, this car has a return fuel system. It normally would have split to 2 aftermarket rails here. I'm gonna cap one of these and try and use just one of them. Along those lines, here's a 8AN fuel rail adapter that will adapt to the stock fuel rails, which are over there. This is a new flow tube gasket for up there. And you guys might be wondering what all these bolts are for. This big order from McMaster car here that I got. You are not supposed to reuse the OEM bolts that hold the heat exchanger to the supercharger. As referenced by this one that someone broke off in this supercharger here. They're torque to yield, one-time use only, so if you reuse them, there's a high probability that that's gonna happen. So, started looking around for hardware. You can order a pack of 50 grade 5 bolts from McMaster for like $8 or $9. So I ended up doing that for the heat exchanger to supercharger, the intake manifold to the supercharger, and the intake manifold for the cylinder to the cylinder heads. That's these right here, all brand new grade 5 or grade 8 hardware from McMaster car. So we got all new hardware for all that. These fuel rails were included with the car. I might have to remake some of them with the correct, 180 degree or 45 degree adapters, whatever. All that being said, I think we have everything here. So I think the first thing we're gonna need to do is probably try and get that broken bolt out of the supercharger. I'm also gonna wanna clean up this heat exchanger, not that it's dirty, but I like everything to be super clean before it goes in the car, especially a mint 21,000 mile car like this. But before we do any of that, just for peace of mind and just so we know, I'd like to do a compression test on this car. So I got the battery charger hooked up. It's basically full. This is a great time to pull these coil covers off, pull out the spark plugs, do a compression test, and just check the overall health of the motor before we put the supercharger setup back together. I have no doubts that it's in perfect shape based on just the way that the car was cared for and the fact that I had videos of it running with the Gen 5 Whipple. But it definitely wouldn't hurt to just know what the compression numbers are in this thing. This being a factory supercharged motor, I'd expect to see somewhat lower compression numbers, anywhere between like 165 to 185, depending on the compression tester. But you guys know what's important in a compression test is consistency. So even if you get readings on the 165 side, as long as most of them are within that, as long as most of them are within the 5% or 10%, whatever, of that 165, you're going to be in good shape. Consistency is key with a compression test. Also, I have my Borescope charging up right now, so we can take a peek into 1 or 2 of the cylinders and just kind of see what we see. Let's put the parts aside for 1 second, do a compression test, maybe Borescope a cylinder, and just see what the overall health of this motor is. Coil covers are out, coil packs are out, and our spark plugs are out. These are NGK TR6s, super popular. Oh, focus. Super popular in the Cobra community. As you can see, looks like this thing was running a little bit rich. They all look exactly the same. My guess is it was on a startup tune for the return fuel system, so it's probably running a little bit rich. No big deal. But everything else looks good. Also worth noting on these cars, the 03s, most of the 03s came with, I think it was like 4 or 5 thread heads. So sometimes you'd get spark plugs. This was really common on the Lightnings too. You'd get spark plugs that would shoot out of the cylinder head because there wasn't enough thread to hold it in. So this car is a 2004, very clearly has the 9 thread head, so plenty of strength and not an issue for this year. So just something to look out for. If you're buying one of these cars. Nothing wrong with the 03s. Typically it's not an issue. Sometimes you have to heel coil a spark plug. That's not a problem. I'm not saying watch out or the 03s are bad, but just not something you even have to think about with an 04. Anyways, went ahead and borescoped one of the cylinders here. First of all, there is a piston in there, which is always good to see. That looks like the factory Zollner piston. Nothing too interesting. Even more important though is, hopefully you guys can see this, the factory cross hatching looks excellent. Cylinders look absolutely perfect. All the pistons look perfect. I already checked all the other ones. I'm not going to bore you guys with all that, but I I got this tool. I'll leave a link for it in the description if you guys don't already have one. It's a good tool to have to check out stuff like that. You know, look in small spaces. It was really helpful with my AMG motor work, and I've used it a ton. Absolutely love this thing. So, but enough of that. Let's move on to my trusty Harbor Freight compression tester that I've had since I basically started working on cars. I know some people probably have bad luck with the cheaper ones, but I've had this thing for like, I don't know, 15 years, and it still seems to work pretty well. So the way this works is you basically you want to pull all the spark plugs, insert this in each cylinder one at a time, crank the car over for, I don't know, approximately 5 to 10 seconds until this thing stops building pressure, and that's your compression number. And we're going to do that for all 8. So I'm going to start right here, and we'll move on from there. All right, there's 180 on the nose, just as we suspected. So now we basically go through the other 7, make sure they're all in about that spot. I like to draw a picture of the motor and record each one of the cylinders, and then we can kind of do a comparison at the end and make sure that everything is within spec. So this one's done. Let's go through the other 7, and I'll check them with you guys when I'm done. All right, so I figured you guys might want to see one in the car too. Another thing to note, that was the first time I've cranked this car over under my ownership. Sounded perfect, no weird noises, no knocking, no banging, no binding, nothing. So perfect compression, no bad noises, that's a good sign. Now normally if you're doing a compression test with the motor all put together, you'd want to open up the throttle body all the way by flooring it, but because we don't have an intake manifold, we don't need to do that. So just clutch in, crank it over. There we go. Let's go check it out. Cylinder number 2, exactly 180, just like cylinder number 1. Actually, I don't know if that's 2. I don't remember on the Fords, but the second cylinder that we've checked, 180. So I'm gonna go through the rest of these, and I'll show you guys the results when I'm done. Well, Dr. Chris is in the house, and I'm giving this thing a clean bill of health. Absolutely perfect numbers all across the board, between 175 and 180 in all 8 holes. Absolutely perfect. This thing is, you know, just as we expected, but the way it looks on the outside and how clean it is, the motor is perfectly healthy. So again, not that I was really concerned about that, but just good to know. Good to have that peace of mind. On the parts front, I'd like to start getting some of this stuff together. So as I mentioned, first things first, I'd like to get this intercooler cleaned up. Not that it really needs it. Basically just has air flow through it, so it's pretty clean as is. But I think I'm gonna just give it a quick power wash. Same thing with the lower intake, and then while that stuff's drying, got to deal with this broken bolt. Got my extractor set out here and I was about to start drilling. Then I realized I have a welder. So I'm thinking I'm just gonna weld this nut right on there, see if we can't back this thing out that way. Then I got my brand new grade 5 McMaster hardware here that can go in and secure the intercooler to the blower. So let's get to work. Well, this is how many tools it took, plus the welder, but after multiple attempts, finally got this bolt out. This many attempts, actually. There's probably a couple other nuts around here somewhere on the floor, but this thing was a struggle. I actually finally figured out that the bigger bolt gave me a better chance at getting good penetration on the bolt itself. So I'm sorry, the bigger nut. And finally got it out, but they just kept breaking off. I tried drilling it out a few times. I don't know if the welding hardened the bolt, but even my brand new drill bits, multiple sets, weren't touching it, so I couldn't even try the extractors, but big mess. But here's my brand new bolt from McMaster-Carr, grade 5, grade 8, whatever it is. Threads right in, no problem. So this is ready to go. Got the lower intake and intercooler cleaned up. These things are ready to go in too. So once these are dry, we can get the intercooler mated up to the supercharger. Probably pop the lower intake into the car with some new gaskets. Start getting this thing assembled. Well, it's been about a week, but I finally got some time to get back on the Cobra here. So when I left off with you guys last time, we had just struggled to get that bolt extracted from the supercharger, but we got that thing out. So now we're ready to kind of put everything together. So the way I think I'm gonna do this is bolt the intercooler to the supercharger, then bolt the supercharger to the lower intake, and then flow tubes and this plate here, get all that together, and then I think I'm gonna drop that entire unit down into the valley there, all as one. So this area needs to be bolted to the supercharger using my new grade 5 or grade 8, whatever these things are, bolts from McMaster, and a little bit of gray RTV, as you can see, is already on here. I cleared all this off as best I could with a plastic razor blade, so this is nice and smooth. We'll get that surgically clean, and then put some of this on. Get the blower on there. I've got to get an EGR plate. I'm probably just gonna make one, honestly, because I got so much scrap steel. And then missing something right here. Said at the beginning of the video, there's always gonna be something you miss. That's where the manifold absolute temperature goes / MAP sensor, which is manifold absolute pressure. So it's both intake air temp and manifold pressure. Just got one of those on order. It should be here in a couple days, but we'll get to that. I think we can put it on after we get the blower on. But in the meantime, let's get this blower mated to the intercooler onto the intake, and then see if we can't get it on the car. Speaking of work, what do you guys wear when you're out in the garage working? Me personally, when I'm in the garage or out working in the house, around the yard, whatever it is, I prefer a nice pair of work boots. These ones in particular are the Wolverine Floor Hand. Some of you guys may have already seen it, but I teamed up with Wolverine for a project, a social media project a couple months ago now with my 69 Camaro to advertise their new Floor Hand work boots. My name is Chris Sullivan, and I work on project cars. A typical day in the garage is getting up early and just getting started on whatever project I'm facing that day. It takes a certain passion and skill and years of experience to take something that's broken and fix it and make it roadworthy. It's important that you're putting in the work no matter what obstacles you have to overcome. And they're just a great company to work with. Their boots are awesome. If you can't already tell, I've been wearing these things basically with every project I've done in the garage, around the house, whatever it is. These things are comfy. These are steel toe. They have an anti-slip coating on the bottom, waterproof, everything else you'd ask for. 12 hours in these things a day, no problem at all. If you want to get some, you could win some right here on this channel. You don't have to buy anything. There's no entry required, nothing. All you have to do is follow me on Instagram and follow Wolverine Boots on Instagram. That's it. If you do those things, you could win a pair of these boots. And the channel's not that big yet, you guys. So the people that are actually gonna do that, probably not that many. So you should do it. You can win a pair of these boots, and they won't look like this, all beat up like mine are already. They'll look something like this, brand new, whatever style you want. These ones in particular are a nice style, but they're available in a couple different styles, whatever your size is. And all you gotta do is follow me and follow Wolverine. Yeah, you gotta be comfy when you're working. That being said, let's get back to work on the Cobra. wop. Well, there it is, complete supercharger and lower intake all together. You saw I put the heat exchanger on the supercharger with a fresh bead of RTV, torqued that to spec, then put the supercharger intercooler combo on the lower intake manifold with a brand new blower gasket, torqued all these to spec, got the flow tubes, some new silicone O-rings, and a new gasket on the flow tube manifold, all that torqued to spec. Made myself a quick little EGR plate for back here. This thing is good to go back in the car. So that means we need to come over here, peel the tape off the cylinder heads there, some new OEM Ford intake manifold gaskets on there, pop that whole blower assembly back into the car. Cobra's finally gonna have its original supercharger back on it, and I cannot wait to get it in there, nestled into its home. So let's keep going, let's keep working, see if I can't lift this heavy SOB by myself into the intake valley. Let's do it. She's home. The Eaton M112 is back where it belongs, on top of the 32 valve, 4.6 liter Cobra long block. Was able to muscle it on there by myself. If you have two people, definitely recommend doing that, but it is doable with one person. Got my brand new hardware all installed all around, torqued to 89 inch-pounds. Got my stock fuel injectors in there on the rail. Got that installed, those bolted down, just to seal everything up so there's no open holes into the motor. Looks like we're gonna need a little bit shorter belt, but there's a couple belts in the trunk that we can probably try with these billet flow idlers and the stock, or I'm sorry, the 2.81 inch upper pulley. But holy crap, not too much work later, and it's starting to look like a complete Terminator motor here. So, I mean, we're getting kind of close. I feel like we just started, but we're still getting kind of close to getting this thing started. Just got a couple odds and ends to wrap up with the fuel system, a bunch of vacuum lines and hoses with the EGR and whatnot, and probably new spark plugs, get the coils back in there, elbow, fabricated intake. So still a decent amount of work left to do, but before you know it, it's gonna be time to hit the key and see if we can bring this 04 Cobra back to life. I promise it won't be another month before the next update. I'm gonna stop filming this and get right back into the next video. More content coming on all my other cars. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give the video a thumbs up, consider subscribing. See you in the next one.